Hey, how's it going guys? It's Nate here. And Fallout 4 offers players quite a massive world to explore. From the towering, still smoldering ruins of Boston's financial district, to the quiet shores of Spectacle Island, to the stormy and scathing glowing sea, it seems the Commonwealth has it all. However, did you know that Fallout 4 is just so massive that it even has a few places you can't visit? Yes, areas of the game only accessible through the use of third-party mods or good old-fashioned console commands. Many of these bits of the game were places created for developer testing, or content that was ultimately cut by Bethesda. And some are just weird, funny environments the devs seem to have just goofed off in. Regardless, that's our subject today, as we take a look at 5 more out-of-the-map secrets you may have missed in Fallout 4. Quick heads up before we begin, most of what we're looking at today will be what we call inaccessible cells. Basically rooms or levels of the game that are supposed to be inaccessible as opposed to just looking beyond the barriers of the playable world with no clip like we did in our last episodes. Anyway, with that out of the way, and without any further ado, let's do further. Starting off, we have what is undeniably one of the most interesting places I've explored in a Fallout game. The Prewar TV Studio. At least, that's what its game ID is. As you can probably already see, this unusable cell is a model of the player's home in the pre-war sanctuary community. But rather than being filled with all the appliances and furnishing we're used to seeing in that home, there are instead 2 well-dressed TV anchors performing some odd animations. One sitting on a counter, and another at a floating table and chair. Some other changes include furnishing largely being stripped from the master and baby bedrooms, though nothing of note being added there. Oh, yeah, and when you open the front door to leave, rather than finding the bustling green community you would expect outside, you'll notice that you're not in a neighborhood at all, but instead floating in some weird white space of nothing. Should you jump and fall into this horrifying purgatory, you'll simply be teleported right back to the safety of the home after a couple of seconds. So, with all of this said, one has to ask, what the heck was this place supposed to be? Why on earth would Bethesda create a cell like this? Well, it's clearly associated with the initial broadcast the sole survivor witnesses on their TV just as the bombs start to fall. At first, I had thought Bethesda was actually sort of streaming that broadcast from this room. Maybe the developers were actually using this place to record the feed we see on screen. However, given the fact that you don't see yourself on the TV when interacting with the broadcasters, I quickly realized that wasn't the case. Instead, it appears Bethesda was using this room to experiment with the item placements and the animations of the reporter. By the way, the reporter sitting at his desk can be killed and looted, whereas the dude sitting on the table can't even be interacted with. You literally can just walk straight through him. Overall, this is certainly a fun place to find and investigate for a few minutes if you're messing around with the console, but doesn't offer much more beyond that. Let's move on. Before we get to our next spot, let me briefly talk about one of Fallout 4's more disappointing locations. So, the Combat Zone is a large theater and auditorium located in Boston's theater district. By the time the events of the game have fired off, it's under the control of a large assortment of raider gangs. They've been using it as a kind of gladiatorial coliseum, where raiders can watch as various participants battle to the death on the center stage. And they commonly wager huge amounts of caps and goods on the fights. It's pretty neat, as the location isn't really controlled by any single raider gang, but is instead run and protected by a large collection of various raider gangs, many of whom have big disagreements with one another, but get along here. Anyway, the reason I called this location somewhat disappointing is that it was actually supposed to be so much more than the simple dungeon that it is today. Despite its backstory and setting, all the Combat Zone really offers us is another dungeon to clear out. Little more than that. However, Bethesda's original plans for the place were much more grand. As cut dialogue reveals, the raiders at this location were supposed to be friendly to the player, and we were not only supposed to be allowed in, but given the chance to bet on and participate in the various battles that take place. Not unlike the arena featured in the Elder Scrolls IV Oblivion. Well, as it turns out, there's not just cut dialogue associated with the combat zone, but also a whole cut location as well. The Combat Zone 02, as it's referred to in the game's files, is a massive complex only accessible via the console that would have functioned as the sort of backstage to the area's theater. In this cut cell, there are dressing rooms, locker rooms, sleeping bags. It's a pretty large complex. None of this can be found in the base game for the reasons we just discussed. However, it can be assumed that we would have went through this area before appearing for those gladiatorial battles we're supposed to be able to participate in. Alas, for whatever reason, 'twas not meant to be. And now the Combat Zone 02 rests in the graveyard of inactive Fallout 4 cells. Coming in at number 3, this place is definitely the weirdest of this video. I give you the Debug Range. So, the Debug Range is a large, flat plain, roughly the size of Spectacle Island, though it looks a bit bigger due to the way the game renders everything. It's filled with unclothed NPCs, T-posing against one-way visual cement walls. There are additionally a number of crafting stations available nearby where you initially spawn in. It's clear from the onset that the Debug Range was created for some sort of testing purposes. But honestly, I can't figure out what kind of testing they were doing here. When any of the T-posing NPCs are killed, a new one will simply spawn in their place within a few seconds, and then start to T-pose themselves. Though, strangely, sometimes they'll be unable to get into the T-pose, and then just perform a whole host of weird animations. This leads me to suspect that Bethesda was trying to do something with NPC character animations and commands, or something. I honestly don't know. I will say, it's always very fun stumbling upon these weird test cells with no context. In a game like Fallout 4 that prides itself on showing players the cruel nature of a broken down society, there's just something laughable about finding a bunch of barely clothed people lined up sticking their arms out for no reason. I don't know, maybe I'm the weird one. Moving on. For our 4th spot, we'll be teleporting on to the Z Unused Fallout Shelter. This location's console name actually does an excellent job at explaining what it is. It's an unused personal Fallout bunker that never found its way into the game. This location seems to be modeled off of the kind of Fallout shelter that would have been used by, I don't know, maybe a somewhat wealthy single family in their backyard or something. The inside seems pretty luxurious though. There's a TV, a couch, multiple bunk beds, a kitchen. It all looks quite nice. Though it is worth pointing out that there's not a whole lot of loot inside of here. There's not much food or ammunition you can find, which A, may suggest that the original occupants of this location simply ran out of resources and maybe starved or were forced to flee, or B, might indicate that nobody ever inhabited this place at all. Maybe the people who were supposed to get inside didn't make it in time before the bombs fell. We can find personal Fallout shelters similar to this one in various other locations. So I'm surprised Bethesda didn't go through with implementing this place somewhere. It seems for the most part fully developed and ready to go, but for whatever reason, Bethesda decided it shouldn't have been implemented. Oh well, while it's no Vault 81, the people who built this place definitely did a good job. And finally, last on our list, we'll be exploring what is likely the best known location of this video, particularly if you're a PC player. QA Smoke. What QA Smoke is essentially the developer god room, as many players like to call it. It's a small plaza containing containers that house quite literally every single item in the game, and even some that aren't, as well as pretty much every set of power armor too. Seriously, there's a chest containing every single piece of clothing, a chest containing every single piece of ammunition, a chest containing every single possible food item. You get the idea. QA Smoke stands for Quality Assurance Smoke. Essentially, this is the place where Bethesda could easily test out every single item and ensure it's working properly, and importantly, playing nicely with Fallout 4's complex lighting engine, hence the name Smoke. There is a single NPC, a merchant that stands around at the center of the place, and sometimes interacts with some of the crafting stations. which, by the way, there are many of. Every station in the game, in fact. The merchant sells just a few medical items, and sadly doesn't have a whole lot of unique dialogue. However, there is a single terminal on the eastern edges of the area, with a single, somewhat funny note, which reads as follows. Remember, use of the recreational terminal is a privilege. If work performance declines, this privilege may be revoked. Enjoy responsibly. End quote. It seems whoever designed this place and script are jokingly poking fun at whoever else in the dev team decided to use this cell. Now, the QA smoke room, with all the goodies it has freely available, has become pretty popular with players looking to, sort of, get an advantage in the game. Since it's technically a vanilla asset, it's been integrated as a mod on both the Xbox One and PlayStation 4, and marketed to downloaders as a cheat room. And it's become a favorite of PC players also looking to find an item without spending minutes searching up that item's ID to type in the console. So if you're really active in the Fallout or Bethesda community, you may already be very familiar with this place, for good reason. Nonetheless, I absolutely had to feature QA Smoke in this video. It is definitely the most iconic place we're not supposed to be able to travel to in Fallout 4. And with that, we are going to wrap up. 5 more out-of-the-map locations you may have missed in Fallout 4. Thanks for stopping by, everybody. Which of these strange, inaccessible cells did you find to be the most worthy of attention? And what areas beyond the scope of the normal game and its camera do you know of that I've yet to cover? Leave a comment down below. As always, like ratings are very much appreciated. Again, thanks for watching, and I hope to catch you all in my next video. Peace out, everyone.